Welcome to the Colony Archive, a review and analysis on the politics of empire and resistance. Earlier, I was joined by Muhammad Ali Mojaradi, the founder of Persian Poetics, and we had a long conversation about the Iranian diaspora, or what he calls the Iranian Diaspora Fatigue. Before you watch our conversation, make sure that you hit the subscribe button below and you also turn on the notifications. You may also follow us on our Instagram and TikTok with the links in the description. In addition to your work on poetry and Persianite culture and history, you also have social commentary here and there. So you have reels that are kind of like rage baits, or I don't know if that you're intending them as rage baits, but they become rage baits.
They do get a lot of rage. That's true. I hope that it's not bait, but there are rage. You know, that's the thing. A lot of people say my work, some of my social commentary is rage bait. But, you know, I understand that there's going to be an angry reaction, but I'm not saying it for the angry reaction. Because if I was just saying things for the angry reaction, I could say more bombastic things, right? I'm saying them because I think they should be said. And I feel like a sad reality is that a lot of people will be angry. And it is a little satisfying to see my haters be angry. That's true. But the goal is to get the conversation pushed forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even in our personal conversations, you say provocative things. So I don't think it's I don't think it's rage baiting as such. It's just that you have a provocative personality.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So you had a social commentary, a semi-viral reel, where you talked about the diaspora fatigue, the Iranian diaspora fatigue. So what was that Iranian diaspora fatigue?
So first of all, people after that reel, maybe you could link it, or if they just look up Iranian diaspora fatigue, it'll come up. People started writing blogs and stuff about it. I hope that the word actually picks up currency because it's a thing to talk about. So for years, I was just getting abused on the internet by members of the Iranian diaspora. Not all of them, not even maybe a fraction of them, but a loud minority maybe. Who knows? No one did a poll. But in any case, people who have kind of a collection of these views that were informed by what the interaction again with the West, that basically I should back up. When we were traumatized by the West, Iranians had various reactions. And one of the reactions was this dislocative nationalism concept that Iranians are actually a great nation. And we were great when we were Zoroastrian in an empire. And then the brown Arabs and yellow Turks invaded us and muddled our genetics and made us Arab and made us Turkified and nomadified. And we had these decadent rulers for centuries. So Iran is a great nation. And it's actually just been made terrible by Arabs and Turks and whatever, and that our true identity is this pre-modern Zoroastrian identity. And there would be a little acceptable if it was kind of really seriously engaging with that, but it's actually like a false image of history, made up history, just fully everything about it is a lie. It's totally inauthentic. It has no continuity, no even earthly connection with actual Zoroastrianism or Iranian history. Just a weird, it's just like a brainwashed view of history. I feel bad for people who are like this, and there's millions of them. And it's very Trumpian, right? Like there's this past Iran that was great, and we're going to resurrect it. And to that effect, they even have miga, which is hilarious, make Iran great again, which in Persian, by the way, miga means something very bad. I won't say what.
Yeah, it's actually an old, it's also in Middle Persian, you have, I shouldn't say it, but you have that verb, which means to do.
To do something bad. But anyway, in any case, so they have this view, and in their view, the traditional culture that I'm attached to, which is our authentic culture with continuity, is an invader's culture. So the tunics, the Islam, the Sufism, the hats, all that stuff is the culture that was produced in invasion. That the real Iran is Zoroastrian, is pre-Islamic. And again, it's just a myth, this idea that there was women's rights and humans' rights and minority religious rights, all this just myths, right?
Yeah, and in Zoroastrianism, when a woman has her period, she has to actually segregate herself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many counter examples to this. The Cyrus cylinder that they say is where human rights comes from, that's not anything to do with human rights. It's just a fake translation that the Pahlavis put out. The idea that we have like continuity with them is not true. I mean, for example, Cyrus, he's actually never mentioned in the traditional classical Persian canon. He's not in the Shahnameh. Hundreds of kings were mentioned in the Persian canon. Jamshid, Dariush, all these people. Cyrus was never mentioned once. Cyrus was actually forgotten by the time of the Sassanids. We didn't know much about the really ancient kings. And the Pahlavis, for that reason, were able to resurrect him and use him as a blank slate for this pre-Islamic LARP, basically.
Another thing I should say on women's issues when it comes to pre-Islamic Iran is that there's a really good book by Leila Ahmad called Gender and Gender. I think it's called Women and Gender in Islam. I think that's the title. And her argument is that actually the harem,
It's a
where you have
Zoroastrian thing.
hundreds or thousands of women and a king or
Yeah.
princess. So it comes from the Sassanid courts, and actually the
They didn't have
Umayyads,
it, yeah.
for all the wrongdoings, the Umayyads did not have a
Yeah.
harem, and it actually comes with the Abbasids, where they're trying to copy the Sassanid imperial culture.
A lot of what we think of as Islamic, like the burqa, intense gender segregation, the misogyny in Hanafi Islam specifically, a lot of that is just Persian culture readapted, which is so ironic because Persians think that there is the opposite happened, that we were magnanimous towards women and the Arabs made us sexist. But the opposite is true, is that we were actually the sexist people and that the Arabs came and Islam was a relative loosening of gender restrictions. The same thing is true with religious freedom, that Iranians imagine that Kurosh, whatever, Kurosh Kabir gave us religious freedoms and that the Arabs brought religious abuse, which the opposite was true. The Zoroastrians were killing Christians and Manichaeans, and there was barely any religious freedom in Iran, especially for native Iranian religions that were competitors to Zoroastrianism, and that Arabs actually brought in this dhimmi system that allowed a little bit of breathing room. So the opposite is actually true. The Arabs brought, with their tribal mix-up in Iran, they mixed things up and brought a little bit of breathing room that we as Iranians didn't have. That religious extremism is actually inherent to us, and the Arabs tamped it down. There's not for nothing the word zindiq comes from zindig. It's Persian. It's Middle Persian. This word that we use in Islam to call people a heretic, it comes from this purity obsession that Iranians have.
Yeah, although I would dispute that religious hate was inherent, because inherent is a very strong word. It means that it's a quality that it cannot do without.
We can disagree with that, but I would argue religious extremism has been a feature of Iranian society since the beginning. The Sassanids were hardcore persecuting the Manichaeans. They filleted Ma'amani alive. They killed like 50,000 Manichaeans. They were persecuting and killing Christians. And then after, when Islam came, Iranians immediately inserted all this, oh, you're Zindiq, you're this, all these purity tests and ideological fights. And then the Safavids came and purged the Sunnis away. And then in the modern Iranian state, we have all this, again, this religious fervor. I'd say religious fervor really now, especially that the Arabs are secular. The last Arab state that took Islam super seriously on a broad scale was the Saudis, and they're chilling that out. So Iran's basically the last state where Islam is super serious, even. So Iranians would say we're kase daghtar az ash, right? A bowl that's hotter than the soup inside. Arabs brought Islam, but we care more about. Anyway, setting that aside. So Iranians who have this meme view of Iranian identity were abusing me online literally for like 10 years. So it's 2026 or 2025, whatever year, Western Europe. For me, it's 1404 always. I don't care whatever. In 1404, right? And 10 years ago, 1394, when I got active on the internet. So subhanAllah, I'm 28 years old now, turning 29, and I was 18 when I joined the internet. I just left Iran. I opened Shahzada as a page because I wanted to be connected to Iranians. And I went on Reddit and Instagram and all that. From then till now, for 10 years, they've been abusing me nonstop. False accusations, writing threads and blogs full of lies, saying that I'm a mullah's child, that I'm this, that I'm that, photoshopping me, photoshopping my name in a list of Basij members, photoshopping me onto photos of Basiji people, contacting the government, trying to get me investigated, like literally trying to do awful things, doxing me, putting my address on the internet, all kinds of terrible stuff. After 10 years of just taking that with kind of a magnanimous, just ignore them, I've decided, I'm tired of these behaviors. We're racist when we have no right to be, right? It would be one thing if we were a successful society and we said, oh, we don't like Afghans. Bro, our country is just as bad straits as the neighbors. We're not doing much better than them. We're racist. We have no right to be, right? Arabs, whenever they say men inta, who are you to tell me anything? بیچاره افغانیه when we're racist them, the poor Afghan guy says تو کی هستی نجات پرست باشی مگه کشور تو آلمانه. Is your country Germany for you to say, wow, your country is worse than ours? Anyway, so we're racist against Afghans when they look and sound and are just like us. We're very misogynistic, even though we claim Islam is misogynist. Extremely. Talk to any Iranian woman online, see the misogyny. We have terrible politics. We're always supporting BB and Trump and all the worst possible things. Funny, the Iranians were supporting mass deportations. Misakin, the poor guys were getting deported. The Iranians in America who supported Trump were now getting deported. Several cases of them. So I made this video, said, look, I'm tired of our online abuse. I'm tired of our emotional politics. I'm tired of our sexism, our racism, all these awful behaviors and ideas we have. And I have fatigue. I'm fatigued by our diaspora, among many other problems, by the way, not even getting into the other issues that I have, but just those easy ones that everyone can agree with. And their reaction proved my point. If you go to the comments on the video, go to the hit pieces they made about me, they digging up old tweets and funny enough, tweets that only support their narrative about me, right? So like they say I'm a mullah, they never pull up the tweets where I criticize mullahs. They say I'm an Islamist, they never criticize the tweets where I criticize Islamists. But anyway, so they try to put out these hit pieces against me. Of course, it falls flat because their criticisms are ridiculous. Anyway, so it's funny, like they say the IRGC funds me. Dude, do you know how scrutinized payments are? Do you think there's some way the IRGC could be giving me money and that the American government wouldn't find out? Are you freaking kidding me, man? The taxes are like public information, basically. I mean, I have an LLC. My LLC's taxes are public information. So you just look it up, Persian Poetics LLC. It's in Michigan. You can find my business address, my tags. Like it's not that deep of a thing. So anyway, and I've been approached, by the way. People in Iran have approached me. Arabs have approached me. Americans have approached me. Israelis, I think, but Jews definitely have approached me. Not with offers for money, but you can tell they're trying to get in good with you to see what you're amenable to. And I've always given cold signals to all of them. I've always said, look, man, I'm not interested in working with institutions. I'm not interested in money. I'm not interested in positions. I'm not interested in funding. I'm not interested in, pushing ideas. I want to be independent, even if I make way less money, because I want to have an authentic voice. So all that's crap. But their absolute insane reaction proved my point. If you go to the comments, I deleted the ones that were threatening or spreading lies. They would always say, you deleted my comments. You deleted my comments. Yes, if you threaten my life or spread lies about me, like you say my dad, who's a secular uncle who makes Islam jokes, is a mullah, yeah, I'm going to delete that because I'm not going to let you lie about my father. And if you claim that I'm an IRGC stooge, I'm going to delete that because that's a dangerous accusation and it's not true. But other than that, I left the comments up. You can go see them. They're all insane. They're emotionally unhinged. Anyway, I could go on forever, but
or you just respond by saying cope. I love that.
yeah. So part of the thing is when people build their identity on lies, they become more and more sensitive. The more your identity is founded in reality and on truth, the more strong it is. But when your identity is founded on a lie and you tell a person that that's not true, they react very poorly, right? So people who are Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, they know that they're not indigenous to Palestine in a genuine way, right? They might be indigenous in like a religious sense that, Judaism is from the Levant and they have this ancient religious connection, but they're not indigenous in like the real sense. Like if you're getting skin cancer at the world's highest rates in Israel, then that means like you're not cooked for the temperament of that place. You're not baked from the clay. You're not falafel isn't really your food. Your food it's delicious, by the way, but your food is like pastrami sandwiches and matzo balls and things like that. So when you tell Israelis you're not indigenous to Palestine, they freak out because they know it's not true. When you tell Black Hebrew Israelites you're not actually an ancient Jew, you're just a Black guy from West Africa who lives in America, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. They freak out. When you tell Iranians that you're not actually an ancient Zoroastrian, they freak out. Normal people don't freak out if you tell them something about their identity that they disagree with that's not true. Like if someone comes and tells me you're not Iranian, you're Chinese, I won't freak out because I know it's not true. But the Iranian Zoroastrian LARPers freak out when you say you're not Zoroastrian. Iran's a brown Muslim country. Get over it. You're not white. You're brown and you're Muslim. You're not Zoroastrian. They freak out because they know it's true, but they want to hide from that truth. But anyway,
this is the biggest part of the diaspora fatigue that bothers me, like the dislocative nationalism that you're describing. And you're right that it's not unique to Iranians. You have many other different nations and peoples who have dislocative nationalism. Some of the examples that you mentioned, but from my experience, the one that bothers me the most is the Iranian dislocative nationalism because it's just so ahistorical and also politically problematic, because we're supposed to have unity and brotherhood with our region of the world, with our neighbors, with the people who look like us and have a common struggle, in order to become a better country. But then we associate most closely with the Europeans or with the whites, and it makes no sense. And I mean, what you mentioned, I think, is really important, because it was not just the Arabs. So the Iranian dislocative nationalism that blames the supposed Iranian decline on the Muslims and the Arabs, or the Arab Muslim invaders. It's not just that. You're very right that they also blame it on the Turks. They say that the Central Asian Turks, they nomadify us, and they came and destroyed our glorious civilization. I mean, even Zabiullah Safa, that you probably heard of, he was an Iranian literary critic during the Shah's era, very brilliant writer, Zabiullah Safa, also a university professor. And when you read his accounts of Iranian literature and Iranian history, he very much also blames the Turks. So not just the Arabs, but also the Turks.
They've quieted that part recently because of national unity issues, because Turks are genuinely like 30% of Iran or something. So they've quieted that one a little bit, but it's there under the surface.
I think it's both, but you're right that primarily, especially in the Iranian diaspora, it is, the Arab Muslim invaders that are seen as the cause of Iranian decline. And also, I mean, what happens here? I mean, there is some commonality between Iranians and Europeans when it comes to the languages.
Distant
So we have the Indo-European. Yeah, there's a distant relation, and I mean, I think that's. I think the linguistic commonality
exactly. Yeah.
got racialized.
They think too much of it. It's
and
like,
you see it in
2,000, more like 5,000 years ago, we were like one broader Indo-European. Maybe like even before that, way before. I guess 5,000 years ago, we had the Persian Empire. Like maybe like 10 or 20,000 years ago, there was like a broad Indo-European community.
We don't even have any surviving texts from the proto Indo-European language.
It's constructed, exactly. One last note about the dislocative nationalism before I forget, I want to just say, so there's three prominent examples that I know of in the world. One is the African American dislocative nationalism, which has manifested itself in several ways. So there's Black Hebrew Israelites, there's the Hotep Egyptian element. I think those are the two most famous, but there were other ones as well, like other niche movements that started in like the 50s and 60s, 70s that died out. But those are more, I can accept those because the alternative is not appealing, to be fair, to say that we were enslaved and whatnot. And also, Black Americans have been put in such a low condition in America. They've had their humanity stripped, and they've been told, you are nothing, you are low, you are meaningless, you're worthless. So in that sense, I can excuse for them to say, no, actually, we are something, we're something great. And to kind of reach a bit and, connect Egypt or connect ancient Israelites or something. It's a bit cartoonish. It's like the product of Americana in the 60s and 70s and whatnot. But I get it. I can excuse it because it's punching upwards. It's coming from a place of a genuinely oppressed people, maybe one of the most oppressed people on earth, literally, saying like, no, we have dignity. And it's a little overzealous, but I won't speak out against it. And I wouldn't tweet against it, or I meet them in New York, these Black Hebrew Israelites all the time. I would never say that to them because it's disrespectful, right? It's not my place. It's a place of a Black intellectual to criticize it. And same even with Israelis. Now, this is where Muslims will be mad at me. Of course, we don't support what's happening in Gaza. We don't support it. We're Muslims here. Guys, come on, please give me a break. But if Ashkenazi Jews who are being raised in Israel want to say that, I'm indigenous to Israel, is outside of the context of their oppression. Let's imagine a different timeline where there was no Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where the Ashkenazi Jews moved to Palestine and there's no conflict. Somehow Palestine's created and they get along. They're like, fine, we'll just live in the same country. In that scenario, if an Ashkenazi Jew says, I'm native, whatever, if it's outside of the context of oppression, I don't mind that because it's like, okay, it's not fun to say that I am an oppressed person from a small, poor village in a ghetto in Eastern Europe. Like it's again, in a way, it's like, it's kind of psychologically meaningful. But Iranians, you're not oppressed. You're in your home country. You're not an oppressed minority. You're not a dislocated refugee. You don't need a fake ideology. You have the real thing. A Polish shtetl guy in Israel has nothing to go back to. What is he going to say? I'm from some stupid Polish village. Of course, he's going to prefer to say, I'm a native Levant Jew. I belong to here. Of course, a Black American prefers to say, I'm an ancient Hebrew Israelite than to say, I'm a descendant of a slave who was massively oppressed. But you, Iranian, miskeen, bichare, why do you need to be something else? You're amazing. Iran is great. Persia is one of the most cool civilizations that everyone recognizes. Prince of Persia, Persian food, Persian rug, Persian cat, Shadbat, all this Persian high culture stuff, backgammon chess, the clothes, the textiles. Like Persia is genuinely has riz, it has pull, it has clout. Why do you need to be something else? Just be who you are. You don't have the excuse of, oh, I'm from some village. Oh, I'm a slave. Oh, I'm this. Oh, I'm that. And I don't even know the other dislocative nationalisms. You have no freaking excuse, dude. You come from a cool civilization. Just be who you are.
This is such a good point. Yeah, this is such a good point because I think we have to be aware that not all dislocative nationalism are the same, and I think, like you mentioned, in the African American context, it's more about liberation than it is about xenophobia. So I think you're very right.
It's noble. There's some nobility there, you know? Like if a Black person says, I think Alex Haley said that the Roots kind of played fast and loose a little bit with the truth, the show. That like maybe it overplayed certain elements and downplayed other elements. And I think one quote is that I think he said, I have to give my people a story to live by. That it's impossible to retell the truth, the past 100% truthfully, but people's need a narrative. So Alex Haley said, I need to give my people a story to live by, and we don't know the story perfectly, so it's okay to fill in the gaps. I don't want to call it a lie, but there's something to be said about a noble lie, about needing to tell your people a story about themselves. Now, I would say the Hoteps and the Black Hebrew Israelites are a little too far, but there's something to be said about, you know, it's a noble lie, that it's okay to fudge a little details for a broader purpose, which is to give dignity, to tell a story, to create a sense of identity, to cement yourself in a story and a narrative. That's true. But there's no noble element to the Iranian version. It's just pure hatred. It's pure racism, pure xenophobia. There's no nobility. Anyway, go ahead.
I think one thing that I should also remind the audience about here is that because we're talking as two Iranians, as two insiders, we also generalize here. We generalize because you talked about how like, oh, Iranians are misogynist and they are this and that. I think we're general, and also with the diaspora too. I think we're very much generalizing with the diaspora fatigue and dislocative nationalism because within the diaspora and also within Iran, where this dislocative nationalism originated, you have very different demographics, and within the diaspora too. I mean, I should also I was looking at some data earlier, and it is true that most of the Iranian diaspora is located in the West. So I think the U.S., Canada, Australia, Germany that we mentioned, UK. But then there's also a sizable population in Iraq, and I think those Iranians are probably very different than the Iranians that are in the U.S.
This is generally an Iranian Persian conversational style, that because you and I, Persian is our native language and we've lived and studied in Iran, we bring it into English. Like we do a lot of mujamala, we do a lot of kind of, oh, this is so great, and mubalagha, a lot of exaggeration. We also in Persian speak in more generalities than in English. So in English, when you speak, English speakers have this understanding that you should always couch your terms and say, oh, this percentage and that percentage, and have stats. And English speakers often say this to me. They always say you generalize a lot. This is kind of how Iranians talk. But the thing is, obviously, we know this is true. Like you and I are Iranian diaspora. So obviously, when we say the Iranian diaspora has these problems, we mean some segment. One thing I've noticed is that the critics who say you generalize, it's usually like in bad faith. Usually they understand that when I'm talking, I mean like some percentage that is unknowable because we don't have good data. Of course, unfortunately, there's no Pew poll of the Iranian diaspora. I would love to fund that, to see, have some billionaire fund it so I can know better. But obviously there is some sense of generality. And what you mentioned is 100% true. The Iranian diaspora in Turkey, in Iraq, in the Persian Gulf countries, in Arab countries like Egypt, in Central Asia. And I haven't been to Central Asia, but I've met Iranians in those places. They usually hardly subscribe to these ideas. And in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf and Iraq specifically, they don't subscribe to any of them. Because Iranians who live in those countries, they live among Arabs. They know that Arabs oftentimes are more secular than Iranians. You and I have had Arab friends. We've lived in Arab countries. We speak Arabic. A lot of Arabs are more liberal and secular than Iranians. That was my perception in Egypt and Lebanon and Jordan, that a lot of Arabs drink, that they date a lot before marriage. Even secular Iranians don't do that sometimes. Sometimes Iranians, in my view, are more conservative. And they also know Arabs well, so they know that they're all whatever, not all barbarians or whatever else. Or even Iranians that live in Europe, even still, because they have Turkish and Afghan friends. So like I have a Rumi class that meets every week, and sometimes Iranians with the diaspora view that I described comes, but oftentimes they don't because they know who I am. But the Iranians who come, they tell me the views you're describing, I used to have them until I met Pakistanis in Europe, until I became friends with Afghans, until I started going to Turkish restaurants. So a lot of times, even the ones who live in the West, usually it's the ones in Toronto and LA that have this view because there's very big Iranian communities that they get absorbed into. But Iranians who live in New York and Chicago, places where we are, they interact with other people and they very quickly realize these views are not right. They very quickly realized, wait a minute, Egyptians are Arabs. Egyptian women don't all wear hijab. Lebanese are Arab. Lebanese people drink. Afghans have women who aren't hijabbed and people who are liberals. Like, wait a minute, maybe my perceptions are very kind of very superficial. So even there in the diaspora, people leave Iran, and in the diaspora, they get disabused of these notions just by encountering people that they have notions about. Like Iranians tell me, embarrassed, last thing, they say, I'll say it in Persian than in English. It's so much more satisfying. Go in an embarrassed way. They told me, one of my students, after I released the video, گفت من که تو ایران بودم فکر می‌کردم همه افغانی‌ها رفتگر و سپور و کارگرن. بعد من اومدم آمریکا دیدم وای دکتر افغانی، مهندس افغانی، بیزنسمن افغانی، خیلی با فرهنگ، با ایرانی ازدواج کردن، خیلی با کلاس. And it seems ridiculous. So she said, when I lived in Iran, she admitted to me privately, I made my video about Iranian racism to Afghans. She said, when I lived in Iran, I thought Afghans were only street sweepers and construction workers. And then I moved to LA and I saw, wow, in California, there's Afghan doctors, lawyers, engineers, really high class people. They've married Iranians. They're very educated and worldly. So she didn't have any chance to know anything real about Afghans. She didn't have a broad anyway. So go ahead.
When Iranians who might only encounter Afghans inside Iran might have a very reductive perception of them, but then when they come to the diasporas where a lot of Afghans are business owners, then the perception changes. And you're very, very much right about kind of the anti-Afghan sentiments in Iran that are very bad. And I have Afghan friends and workers in Iran, and they always complain to me about it because they trust me and they see that my politics are different.
And in Tehran, I had the same experiences. When you befriend Afghans, like I go to the traditional clothing tailors in the Afghan bazaar to get like these tunics and stuff. And after a while, they become your friend and they kind of complain a little bit. They talk to you about their experiences with Iranians. But you would be surprised, even as bad of an experience some of them have, they genuinely have love for us. Like a lot of them still like Iranians.
So also what's really interesting to me is that the politics of integration or assimilation is very different. Because in the US, oftentimes, especially if you're more liberal areas, you try to kind of assert your difference, or you try to kind of feel and talk about your marginal identity. But in Iran, if you're an Afghan, you usually try to fit in. And you don't try so if you actually approach an Afghan about their Afghanness in Iran, they don't.
No, they want to emphasize their similarness.
Yeah, they like
so
to
whenever
be
I would talk to them, I was like, "Oh, where are you from?" They'd be like, "Oh, Afghanistan." And usually they are afraid you're going to be racist. So I was like, "What city?" And they're like a little bit. So I kind of signal to them that I know about Afghans, like Bache Gandhari, Kabuli, Panjshiri, Herat, and they're like, okay, you understand Afghanistan. They're like, oh, I'm from, whatever, Nimruz or something. And then what I always notice is even if their guard is down, they know you're not a racist Iranian, that you're chill. They always want to emphasize the similarity. They're like, Moham Zabanim, Ham Keshim. We love Rumi. We speak the same language. We have the same religion. We both love Rumi. We have the same history. So much of the Shahnameh took place in modern day Afghanistan and Khorasan. We love Iranians. We live with each other. We love you guys. So you're right. They always try to emphasize the similarness. And a lot of Iranians have come to this conclusion. Like early on, I remember earlier, there was a wave of Afghans who came in the 80s. That we knew them, some of them. My grandpa worked with some of them in business. That came because of the the Russian war. So some of them have been there now for like 3 generations. Like the guy comes in 1979, 80. He gives birth to a kid in 1985, and the guy has his child in like 2005, and that kid is getting married now. So like some of them are 4th generation now, but a lot of them started to come in the early 2000s. Again, you and I maybe were there, or you maybe were around Iran then, and the waves started to come, and that's when the racism really started. is when millions of them were coming. Like Iran still has the largest, like 5 million refugees, like the largest refugee population in the world per capita for sure. And that's when the racism started. Now the racism is starting to go down a little bit. Now it's gotten up because of the war, but like it was going down because people had enough experiences. Like everyone in Iran had an Afghan, corner store bodega owner. Everyone in Iran had an Afghan doorman. Everyone had an Afghan taxi driver and an Afghan restaurateur. And they've like met enough of them to know that there's good and bad. Like my uncles who used to be racist 4 or 5 years ago, be like, nah, آدمای خوب و bad دارن, like خیلی سخت کارن, like they have good and bad among them. They're very hardworking. And anyway, so perceptions change with experience.
Although sometimes additional experience could make you more racist. And one example I always give is that when a lot of white people travel to the global south, instead of becoming less racist, they become more racist.
They become more racist. Yeah, they realize their bad tendencies. Yeah, it really depends what your frame of interaction is. Like my grandpa worked for a guy who ran a flower business, and he was kind of managing a greenhouse, and all the workers were Afghan. And my grandpa had the best experience. He was like an Afghan file. He really liked Afghans because he had a bunch of Afghan employees, and he saw that they're hard workers. They get to know you, so they tell you their stories. They would tell him about how they were abused, how they were beaten by Iranian police in the border, how they faced so many difficulties. The Hazars and the Tajiks would talk about how the Taliban would torture them and bother them. So my grandpa had, and they would cook Afghan food every day. So he grew up eating, or not grew up, he was old by then, but he was eating kabali polo, and he was hanging out with them, and they were his friends for decades, and we became family friends. And when we lived in America, my grandpa would take me to Afghan restaurants, and he would talk about how Afghans were great people. And in our Iranian masjid, the Afghans would come, even though they were Sunni, but because it was a Persian speaking masjid, they would come. So growing up, I always had the vision that Afghans are decent people, they're good people, they're like us. So when I went to Iran, I was shocked as a teenager to see the attitudes formed from the second wave of Afghan migration. They're dangerous, they're thugs. Because my grandpa always raised me saying, these are decent people, they're like us, they speak our language, they have our history, they're good to us, they like Iranians, they come and they work hard in Iran. So it saddens me, really. That more than anything about Iran saddens me. That really bad, toxic relationship between Iran, and now with the Taliban, it's worse again. Iran and Afghanistan, anyway.
No, it would really sadden me too, just like hearing some of the racist things Iranians would say about Afghans, and but yeah, so the kind of related question I have, because you talked about how some of the Iranians who come to the diaspora, their perceptions of, say, the Afghans or the Arabs change because they might live in the same communities or go to the same grocery shops. And this is actually what I say oftentimes, is that I say sometimes like white racism might be different from Iranian racism, in the sense that Iranian racism might be more abstract, but when it comes to lived experience, so an Iranian might in the abstract say, oh, the Arabs cause us to decline and they don't have culture, etc. But when it comes to lived,
but then he goes to an Arab grocery store.
Yeah, they go to the Arab grocery store if they want to do shopping in America. They don't go to Whole Foods. They don't
met
go to, I don't
Iranians
know,
who
like
are
Targets.
racist
They
against
go
Arabs
to,
in theory. Like Arabs made us decline. And then you bring up Arab food, like, oh, I love hummus, I love Lebanese shawarma, oh, I love Feiruz, oh, my favorite
exactly.
hookah lounge is a Lebanese hookah lounge, and my ex-boyfriend was Lebanese. Or like, I thought you didn't like Arabs. Like, nah, un moge they invaded us, but they're good people now. Or like the Afghans, it's so funny. Even I have had so many realizations. Did you know barbari bread is Afghan? It's not Iranian originally. It came from Afghan. So I went to an Afghan store in DC, and I said, do you guys have barbari bread? And the guy who heard me, he had only lived in Afghanistan. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. But then one guy working there had lived there. I said, oh, I know what you're talking about. And he said, we just call it tanuri bread because it's like just default bread for us. It's our normal national bread. And he said, oh, this is Afghan. I looked it up. Sure enough, it's an Afghan bread that Afghans brought to Iran. So there's so many small niche things we have in common. And, there were no borders back then. Like in Iran, you can meet people named, like in my neighborhood in Western Tehran, there's Shahid Kabuli Street. So this would be someone who's like great grandpa left from Kabul to Iran. And when he wrote a last name, he's like, well, man bache Kabul, I'm from Kabul, so I'll just write Kabuli. And his grandson died in the Iran-Iraq war for Iran. People named Harati. In Mashhad, you'll meet people named Harati. And then on the other side, you'll meet people with Iranian place names. So There was no border. We were all just mixing and making friends and moving. And racism, you know, it poisons the heart. It poisons relationships. It makes everything coarse and painful and uncomfortable. Why not just embrace people? And then also, you can still criticize. You can still speak honestly. You can still be critical if you want to be critical, just without the racism, you know? Anyway, we could dwell on this forever, but I think we're on the, most people inshallah are on the same page, is my experience.
Yeah, and so talking about the Iranian diaspora encountering other diasporas that have common culture with them, how would you say the Iranian diaspora in the U.S., where you have your most experience, how do they compare to other Middle Eastern diasporas? Because we're usually put in the Middle Eastern category.
I think it really, you have to look, when everyone understand these groups, is you have to look at the circumstances that caused them to go. So that will tell you basically everything you need to know. I mean, obviously the circumstances they arrive to also is like half the picture. This is the other half. So first of all, what makes you leave a place? Are you leaving because of a war like Iraqis and Lebanese people and Afghans? Are you leaving because of political problems like in Iran, or economic problems like Egypt or Lebanon? Right? That tells you one side of the story. So people who leave because of economic problems tend to have the most healthy relationship with the home country, like Lebanese people, Egyptians, Pakistanis, whatever, Turks. The people who leave because of war or politics tend to have one degree of uncomfortability. So Iraqis, Iranians, you know, some Lebanese people, depending on when they left, Palestinians, etc., Yemenis, they have some degrees of some, there's something there. There's something. And then another thing is what kind of condition they arrive in. So Iranians are filtered through economics in America. A lot of poor Iranians end up as asylum seekers in Europe. But to make it to North America, usually you have a degree, you have some money, some disposable income to throw at the visa process and the lawyers and renting a place here and flying here. So Iranians tend to come with high education and high expectations and high standards. That's why if you look at, we're like Indians. We have really high educational and economic attainments in America.
Mm-hmm. And you know what's funny to me is like when they say, like a lot of Iranians or Indians say that I came to America with nothing, like I had zero money in my pocket. It's usually an exaggeration, because if you had the money to pay for the plane ticket, and you came with intellectual capital, so you cannot say I came with nothing.
Exactly. Exactly. You came ready to work as a software engineer at Microsoft. Like, relax. Okay. So I lived in Michigan, but we had Lebanese businessmen who left because of the war, who went back and forth after the wars were done. We had Iraqis who fled Saddam's persecution. And then we had Iraqis who stayed through the persecution, but fled the Iraq war from some southern village. So an Iraqi Shia, think of how similar these two people are. They're both Iraqi Shias. One was an intellectual or Baghdadi political Shia who fled Saddam, and one is a villager from the south who fled the Iran-Iraq war. Even though they ostensibly have a lot in common, they're two very different people. One of them lives in Detroit and is working class, and one of them lives in a suburb. Take an Iranian who flees Iran just to make higher wages in Turkey or in Europe and doesn't have political drama, with an Iranian who leaves because of political drama in 79, with an Iranian who leaves because of economic problems in 85. Or compare, it can go on and on, right? So then also the conditions they enter into. So the poor Southern Iraqi who moves to Warrendale, Detroit, has neighbors who are Black and Hispanic, who works in an auto body shop, who might go to jail because of problems that people in those communities end up in jail for. But the Iraqi intellectual who leaves Baghdad, who gets a poli-sci PhD and becomes a professor at U of M, is going to live a very different life. So these are also factors. So Iranians mostly in America, they are mostly elective. I mean, the older school that left in the 60s and 70s are different. Some people left to become doctors and stayed. Some people left because of 79. But generally, they leave with education. And that puts us on a trajectory towards whiteness, towards faster assimilation, towards leaving our Middle Eastern idiosyncrasies behind. Whereas like a Pakistani halal cart guy or a Bengali taxi driver here has different conditions, different trajectories. Here is New York, by the way. Anyway, so all of that needs to go into view.
But if the distinction was that in Europe you can go by land, or it's closer, and you can get refugee status, I mean the Pakistanis also have to come via plane and air. So why is it that the Pakistanis come with less intellectual capital?
Somehow the South Asians in New York, many of them are working class. Outside of New York, that tends not to be the case. South Asians tend to be like software engineers, doctors, lawyers, whatever. But in New York itself, somehow there's working class Pakistanis and Bengalis, which usually isn't the case. And also in Hamtramck, Michigan is the only other place I've seen. Maybe there's other places, but that's what I've seen here. So again, like a Pakistani living in Manhattan who's a software engineer is different than a Pakistani living in Queens who is a taxi driver. And they're both Pakistanis living in New York, right? So ostensibly there's a lot in common, but there also isn't, right? I learned this distinction the hard way when I took a Mexican American who was from a very elite background, or a Mexican who had moved to America for college, who's from a very elite, like ruling class background, to the Mexican neighborhood in Detroit, which is all working class people from like Jalisco and from northern Mexico. And he's like some Mexico City super rich guy. And I was like, oh, these are your people. Do you relate to them? He didn't act like the way I would if you took me to an Iranian enclave. He seemed distant from them. And he confided to me, he said, you know, honestly, Mohammed, they're really not my people. We don't really have that much in common. Like socially, culturally, economically, geographically, historically, we're very different. Like they're indigenous people from the north of the country. I'm a European Spaniard from the southeast of the country. You know, I'm like the ruling class. They're the servant class. Like we actually don't have a lot in common. So these details people get missed. And that's why the Iranian diaspora in America, or even in Europe for that matter, doesn't really represent Iran that well. Because a Sunni Kurd doesn't hate Islam. A Baloch Sunni, a Turkmen Sunni, a Azeri Shia living in Miandab or Khoy doesn't hate Islam. They might be very zealous, actually. They might be hardcore in support of the government. The Iranian diaspora is a very particular group of people. It's like how New York Italians are all Sicilians and Napoletan. They're all from Naples and you know, in Sicily and from Calabria. They're not people from the north. They're very different from each other. They have big differences compared to each other. A genuine Italian told me this. A genuine who'd moved to America, who I met studying abroad in Jordan, who had studied in New York. I said, did you culturally relate to the Italians there? He said, no, because they're all from the South. I'm from Genoa. Our food is different. Our dialect is different. Our customs are different. Our belief systems are even different a little. So anyway.
And I mean, we talked about this. I mean, on the one hand, the Iranian diaspora is very different than Iranians inside Iran. So there are those differences. But then within Iranian diasporas too, I mean, like you mentioned, the Iranian diaspora in Iraq might be very different than the Iranian diaspora in LA. They're, you know, they have very different values, very different lifestyles, very different experiences. And usually when you talk about the diaspora fatigue, you're talking about the Iranian diaspora in America, because that's what you and I are used to. That's what we experienced a lot. And so, speaking of that, I mean, you mentioned some of these, but if you want to give some more specific, like personal examples of the diaspora fatigue, what is?
Yeah, of course, sure. One big example is pre-79 or post-79. So pre-79 Iranians tend to have a healthier relationship with post-79 ones. So people who left because of the revolution, who never went back, they have this bitterness about the experience, which fair. I don't expect them not to be. And they also have this cavalierness when they talk about Iran. Like the people who advocate for sanctions or bombing tend to be that because they don't have family or connections in Iran really anymore. Whereas for me, it's not like that because my dad, first of all, he didn't lose anything because of the revolution because he wasn't landed elites. Like I've met many landed elites, people who lost buildings and villages and positions. You know, we didn't lose that. We were like lower middle class, even lower class people, honestly, working class people. And also my dad didn't leave because of 79. He came to study on a government scholarship. And he didn't participate in the revolution one way or the other. He literally didn't participate in any way. He didn't protest for or against. He didn't vote for or against. He's very proud of that till this day. He said that when the revolution was happening, there were some Iranians who were pro-Shah abroad and some who were anti-Shah. And they were fighting all the time. He said, I would never argue. Some went to vote for the Republic and some voted against. He said, I didn't vote. He said, I stepped aside. I said, both sides, there's going to be some regret at some level. I don't want to get involved in this. I'm just here to study. I'm staying out of this. Until this day, he says, my most vindicated decision in life was that one, was to stay out of Iranian politics in the diaspora because it's poison. There's no benefit. In any case, so these Iranians, they say, oh, 79, oh, our land or a house, oh, whatever. We never saw Iran. And I can't relate to that because 79 isn't the reason my dad left. And my dad did go back after 79 because he didn't have anything in America. He just had his family in Iran. And we did continue to go back and forth. And we do visit Iran. So I even find that the fatigue tends to come from those people. So Iranians who visit Iran or they're fresh from Iran, no matter how much they buy into that dislocative nationalism, they tend to be they have a foot in reality. But usually, like Iranians who were left before 79, they have this Manoto brain idea of what Iran is like. Like I was on a plane heading to Iran, and there was an old lady who was crying. She was very beside herself. So I felt bad. I was like, "Are you okay, ma'am?" She said, "My sister died. I haven't seen her in 50 years. I feel so bad for not going back." And she had a Shahi passport in her hand. She was flying. You can do that. If your loved one dies, you can fly to Iran on an expired passport. They'll make an exemption and like let you. Yeah. Yeah, you have, but like they'll let you in if you're like they're crying, like, oh my God, my sister just died, or my mother is dying. They'll let you in. But so anyway, so she was like, oh my God, I'm so scared, but I thought my sister is dying or dead. I have to come. But like, what will they do to me? And I said, what do you mean, what will they do to me? Who are you? I gathered she was a normal person, but she thought just because she's flying with the Shahi passport that they're gonna like imprison her for like having that. And I said, well, ma'am, everyone had a Shahi passport. Even Khomeini had a Shahi passport. Like just having a Shahi passport is not a crime. We all had it. All of our parents and grandparents had it. So these people, like their kids who are raised here, like no Iranians are Muslim anymore. They'll cite that stupid Gammon poll that says like 25% of Iranians are Muslim. They'll say only 25% of Iranians are Muslim still. They always tweet this at me. I say only you, who's never been to Iran, would say that. So I'll tell them all the people who go to Imam Hussein's Muharram stuff, and all the people who go to the Iranian government protests, pro-government protests, and all the religious-looking people, they're only 20%. Really, only 20%. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So, I mean, I think that poll has problems and has been criticized.
It's a Twitter poll. It was done via Twitter.
Because the two guys, the two academics who run it, they admitted that how they conducted the poll was that just through online surveys, and there was a problem that it could like like-minded people could have responded to it. So they admit to all that. And I think you're right that the number of people who are not Muslim in that poll is very inflated. But I think it does point to one reality, which is that over the years, and it's not just the Islamic Republican phenomenon. I think this has happened since the constitutional movement. Yes, I think it's a 20th century phenomenon where people like secularization is increasing in Iran and people have more options. Because if you were, say, in Rumi's time, it was pretty inevitable that you would believe in God at some level. And even if you did not, even if you did not, uh, even if you did not observe the rituals, and even if you did not say pray, you were still Muslim. And also the being non-religious was not an identity, similar to how like being gay was not an identity. So you might have engaged in homosexual acts, but you were not gay. In the same way, you might have missed your prayers, but being non-religious or non-Muslim was not really an identity. Yeah.
You're not a non-Muslim. Yeah. That's also what Ahmadinejad was misunderstood for. When he said we don't have gays in Iran, what he meant is we don't have modern gay culture. Of course, Ahmadinejad knows that there's people with male attraction in Iran, duh. But anyway, the important thing is like, yeah, so in the past, secularism didn't exist, and there was also no alternative. If you came and said there's no God, they would say, well, what? Did the earth create itself? There was no plausible answer. Science has created a plausible secular identity, and there's a Western alternative now, which religious people like myself, I can't speak for anyone else, but religious people like myself need to actually address it with seriousness. We can't dismiss it. We have to come up with a plausible, realistic, palatable answer to the questions and challenges posed by modernity. But essentially, in the past, there was no option. And then in the 19th and especially 20th century, the option begins and it spreads to the Middle East. And this is one thing that people mistake is they say, oh, the Islamic Republic, if you're a religious Muslim, then you should hate the fact that they made everyone be secular. Well, there's some truth to that. But this secularism, like you said, started in the Qajar era. And the Islamic Republic's culture wars have certainly helped accelerate the reaction. But without the Islamic Republic, I think we would still be looking at the same level of secularization, if not maybe even more, because the Shah was pushing secularization as our thing. So maybe we'd be like Turkey. You go in Turkey in the street, a lot of Turks don't know the first thing about Islam. They really don't know scratch. A lot of people, like seriously, they don't know anything. A lot of the people in Turkey.
But the masajid, the mosques seem pretty filled in Turkey whenever I went.
That's like a new phenomenon. There's also a lot of people from smaller towns moving to big cities, so they're religious, and a lot of Syrians, a lot of foreigners. But the average native Istanbulite, like the average native multi-generational Istanbulite, is pretty darn religious, or irreligious, I would say, and secular even. And there's another thing: secular Iranians still know about Islam. Secular Turks, because there's no mandatory Islamic education, like genuinely don't know much. Like genuinely, they don't know anything often, a lot of them.
But then I was asking about like some of your personal experiences with the diaspora fatigue.
Yeah, sure. So basically, it's just the belief in this dislocative nationalism, the stupid sound bites about Cyrus the Great and the Cyrus cylinder and how we weren't sexist, and even more than the racism and misogyny, because all communities have racism and misogyny. I guess maybe even Iranians are not the worst offenders, or not even close. Really, I would say it's really just like the learned ignorance, and I say learned ignorance because they learn to be ignorant. Because to believe that Kurosh was some massively important figure throughout our history when he wasn't, again, there was no mention of him in the Shahnameh in any of our canon. Look, go in Ganjur, type in Kurosh, he comes up like twice in modern poets. The idea that like we were magnanimous to women and that we weren't sexist, it's a learned ignorance. It's an ignorance that you have to be taught to believe. That's what's frustrating. It's whatever. If an uncle is sexist or racist, whatever, all of our diasporic uncles in all communities have that stuff, right? Go to Astoria, the Egyptian dudes sitting in the hookah lounge are sexist and racist, and go to the Jewish neighborhood, they're sexist. It's all uncles are like that, right? But the learned ignorance, and no Egyptian uncle would tell you that they were better off if the pharaohs were still in charge. No Italian would say that like we should reconstitute the Roman Empire. It's only Iranians who are obsessed to a fault with this idea of like Persia and bring back Persia, and how it coarsens our relationships too. How it makes them have these assumptions about me and have these hatreds even for me and for Afghans. That's the experience that really makes me dislike it and want to speak out against it, is that it just coarsens our life unnecessarily. I always tell people, why do we have to bring and even invent ethnic conflicts from different times and places? Okay, khalas, the Arabs invaded us 1400 years ago. 1400 years ago, Habibi, not now. Back then. Can't you just be friends with Arabs? Why should you? I meet Iranians who they avoid Arabs and they avoid Arab enclaves and they forbid their kids from marrying or dating Arabs because of Qadisiyah. Why? Why would you do that to yourself? That's ridiculous. Why don't you want to go to Astoria or Bay Ridge with me? Or don't you want to go to Dearborn? Because Araban. Voy, Araban. So what if they're Arab?
You've met
Yeah,
Iranians in
yeah.
the
چرا
US who
بریم
say that?
دیربان؟
They're like,
عربن همشون. ول
yeah,
کن دیربان. عرب خونه.
that are not
Yeah.
because yeah, I mean the uncles would say
No,
that, the
not
uncles and
kids
the
raised
aunts,
here. No,
but
no, not
yeah,
the
even
ones
the
our
younger
age. Yeah, the ones
generation, I guess you meant.
that's the funny thing. By the time
Yeah.
they're our age, they're like dating Lebanese and Egyptians and marrying Pakistanis and going to hookah lounges. Because when you're in a pan Middle Eastern diaspora, you just all be friends with each other. You make friends in school and whatnot. But it's really like the adults and the fobs. But rarely you find, again, ones that are from LA sometimes are like this because they have such a cocoon of Persians, and there isn't like another bigger Middle Eastern community there that I know of. There's like Armenians, but like half of them are Iranian too, so it's not a big deal. But in places where Iranians are not the overwhelming majority, yeah, they tend to just blend in and be friends. So thankfully, that mindset seems to be limited to the FOB generation. So there's that. There's that point of hope.
Very interesting
You're too
observations and
kind.
analysis. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate having you on and you coming back on the show. Yeah, and
Thank you.
so I'll link to your work in
You
the
can grab the
description
book
so
too.
people can follow you. And we have, I think, many more conversations to go. Yeah, The Flame of Love, Rumi's 100 most
Thank
passionate
you. Too
poems.
kind.
I recommend it to all friends if they want to read Rumi. Yeah, and because as well as we all know, the
So
Coleman Barks
fortunately, yeah.
translation, we
Thank you. I'm
cannot
glad
rely
we
on that.
talked about
So,
this. We've talked about this privately for so long.
no.
I'm glad that we have this open conversation that anyone can access. I hope that the Iranians who watch it, who think like us, I hope that it's cathartic. The Iranians who disagree with us know that we love and respect you. You're a compatriot. We love you to death. We all have to share and live in Iran together. We are not denying your Iranianness. We don't want to make you feel like we're better than you and you're worse than us. We just have some small disagreements about some attitudes. That's it. All love and respect to our secular Iranian cousins and friends, even siblings, parents. And to non-Iranians, I would like to just have a bit of caution that we're two Iranians, like Navid mentioned, speaking kind of in broad terms, using broad strokes. Please don't take this as any broad, sweeping generalization. Everything has nuance. And also just be cognizant of the fact that we're Iranians having an Iranian conversation. This is inside baseball. So I would just ask that you respect that boundary, and that if you want to talk about Iranians, that you just respect that. If you're not Iranian, it's just different. So please also be aware of that fact. It's just a little cautionary note.
Yeah. And to kind of talk about the politics of this episode, I must mention, because it is a time of war and Iran is under assault from both US and Israel, but primarily Israel, I think it's good to be united, and it's good for the Iranians inside Iran, the diaspora, to, I mean, even if they have different ideologies, political disagreements, to be united against the destruction of the country. So I think that's important. But unfortunately, the problem is that because some segments within the Iranian diaspora, especially the Reza Pahlavi supporters, they're just so angry about the Iranian government that, in a way, they're indirectly and effectively supporting the Israeli bombing. So that's very sad. But the hope is that through self-reflection and critique, those elements of the Iranian diaspora would move to a more kind of sane and rational position, that even if they disagree with the government or they want it to be changed or replaced, that it should not come through the Israeli intervention or the Israeli bombing and war. That would be disastrous for everyone in Iran.
We're not fanboys. We're not cheerleading anything. We're not paid by anyone. We just want the best for Iran. We think critically. We are not the types of people that just bite off whatever the West offers for us to chew. And we want the best for Iran. We just don't maybe view things the way that everyone does. And we just ask for grace and an open mind when people listen to us. Don't be so, quick to judge. Just because we don't believe everything you believe doesn't mean we're paid by the mullahs or whatever. خیلی مخلصیم دمت گرم. I love to see your page growing
right.
and your
Me too.
videos. I
Me too,
watch
my
all
brother.
of them, and it's very necessary to have your voice among the Iranians who are thoughtful abroad and in Iran. So looking forward to your videos as always, not just because I'm in them, but genuinely.